everyone, and a warm welcome to the show. I am Omono Okonkwo with a special edition of Energy Frontiers for the week. The African Development Bank launched the African Economic Outlook at its week-long annual meetings held in Accra, Ghana. The president of the AfDB Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, addressed Africa's need for financing to address climate change and provided reasons why developed countries should meet their earlier pledges for climate financing.
The African Economic Outlook also focuses on the issue of climate change and the just energy transition, which form the theme of the annual meetings of the African Development Bank. The report shows that Africa needs a lot more financing to tackle climate change, but it came at it from a different perspective, or let me say, a new perspective. The global community has for many years been clamoring, and more recently at the COP26 in Glasgow, for developed countries to pay up on the $100 billion promised for developing countries on climate finance. The African Economic Outlook takes a very innovative modeling approach based on what I could call denied gains in Africa in terms of economic growth due to developed economies' carbon-intensive growth trajectories over decades and the wealth creation pathways, and goes on to show that indeed Africa has an allocative carbon credit of up to $4.8 trillion by 2050. That would mean that Africa is owed $173 billion annually between this year and 2050. It's a lot higher than the $18 billion that Africa got in terms of climate finance. You see the difference. It's a far cry from the financing Africa is getting today. You will find the report to be very illuminating, with excellent analytical and modeling works used to make a very clear case for what the authors call carbon headroom for African economies to be able to grow. A very interesting and very novel concept.
Expanding further on Dr. Adesina's presentation on climate financing was the AfDB's acting chief economist and vice president, Professor Kevin Chika Urama. The economist explained how universal access to energy is important and comes first before other sustainable development goals. The AfDB vice president also spoke to Africa's need to reduce emissions and become climate resilient as part of the highlights of the AfDB's latest African Economic Outlook reports.
As already gathered in this conference, climate change is an existential threat for Africa. Africa has contributed little to the global climate emissions, and Africa is suffering the most from climate change. So finding policies that can triangulate addressing climate impacts, which is real for Africa, and also allowing Africa to continue to grow within that carbon headroom that the president has introduced, was the subject of inquiry of this report. If we do that, we'll be able to achieve what we've called inclusive growth. The report is structured in 3 chapters. The first is on Africa's economic performance and outlook. The president has already painted the picture for 2020, 2021 and 2022. Then we looked at climate resilience and just energy transitions in Africa. The innovation here is that we have always been talking about climate resilience and meeting the global climate commitments. But we also know that the Sustainable Development Goals has as a key goal universal access to energy. And that is for a reason, because energy access is fundamental to achieving all the other goals that we have in the global goals for 2030. Financing climate resilience and just energy transitions becomes then very important for continents and countries suffering most from climate change, such as Africa. So this report is supposed to bring all this together and see where we can find the innovations and practices to be able to achieve that inclusive growth, triangulating the need to grow our economies, the need to be climate resilient, reduce emissions and adapt to climate change, and also the need to be able to find the financing required to reduce the impacts of climate on society.
There is more from this week's AfDB's annual meetings 2022 in Accra, Ghana, when Energy Frontiers returns. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the program dedicated to discussions on energy at the just concluded AfDB annual meetings. The week-long summit of the DFI featured a number of panel discussions, one of which was focused on addressing Africa's energy challenges. Speaking on that panel was Carlos San Basilio, the Managing Director in charge of corporate strategy at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The EBRD chief provided pointers to achieving a just energy transition in Africa. Take a listen.
And particularly Northern Africa has been working very well in Egypt, in Morocco, in Tunisia. And these three ingredients of the recipe that works for us in promoting net zero emissions are the following. First, it is necessary that every country has a clear strategy of not only of where it wants to go, but also how it wants to get there. So it's not only about NDCs, but it's also about LTS, the long-term strategy. This is an instrument that we think is going to be very useful for countries to design their strategy going forward for a zero emission. So the first element is a clear strategy, clear goals, and clear actions. The second is, of course, there's going to be necessary a lot of investment. And be it public, be it private, be it international, be it national or multinational. But the three element is key if you want to have access to this investment. This third element is the regulatory framework and the right policies. And you basically need the three of these elements to make sure that the country can make progress in terms of the green agenda. You need, again, the strategy, you need the investment, and you need the policy. And that's the way we have dealt with the different cases we have had in Northern Africa. In Egypt, for instance, we have made a lot of progress on renewables with 26 projects and 1.3 gigawatts already deployed there. In Morocco, we've been working on some innovative solutions for private-to-private use of renewable, trying to minimize also something that has been presented in the document before, the debt burden for the sovereigns. So from our side in EBRD, our focus is private sector, and we aim at mobilizing as much as possible private sector investment for the private sector in the different countries where we operate. But it's not only Egypt. In Morocco, we've been doing some very interesting projects in terms also of hydropower. And also in Tunisia, we've been engaging with SMEs also because they also play their role in promoting the green agenda. So we think that an engagement with the local authorities is fundamental for multilateral institutions, but it's also fundamental that the local authorities have a view that combines the need for investment with the need for actions from their side to favor that this investment is mobilized and comes to their countries.
We bring finance into Africa's energy conversation as part of our coverage of the AfDB's annual meetings. That's next on your Energy Frontiers. Don't go away. I am Omano Okonkwo, and this is Energy Frontiers. Enoch Godongwana, the Minister of Finance and AfDB Governor for South Africa, was one of the high-profile delegates and participants at the AfDB annual meetings in Ghana this week. The finance chief spoke about Africa's contribution to climate crisis. Using his country, South Africa, as an example, Godongwana stated that Africa needs an alternative development model which requires strategy and planning from country to country as well as on the continent as a whole.
One of the common challenges within the African continent is that we're not the greatest emitters. We contribute about 3.8% of global emissions as the African continent. Of course, there will be variations. For instance, South Africa has got more concentration in 90% of South Africa's electricity generated from coal. So there will be the variations within the African continent, but globally as a continent, we contribute less. So that's the first point. The second point is that in that environment, if we contribute less, what is going to be required is what kind of support measures are going to come from the developed world, which will have us reap these corporate benefits. They've already promised $100 billion, which is not materializing, which could be a core benefit for all of us in order to transition from, you can see in the slide that was presented here, is that despite that we're one of the fastest economies on the continent in terms of moving away from coal. So with a bit of support from the developed world, which will help us to achieve those benefits, it's going to be important that happens. I mean, if most of the economy, I mean, like South Africa, if I may take our own position, is that for us to benefit, I've been discussing with some of the developed world, is that if we're going to transition effectively, it's going to be important that we emphasize the just component of the just transition. I normally cite to them that we've got one region which contains about 13 of our coal power stations and mines. To shift from those coal mines and 13 and coal power stations in that region, there's going to be huge social dislocation, which is Mpumalanga. The question is, what that means is that what the missing link is that when you talk about this thing, it's not only about planting few renewable power stations, it's a complete new development and alternative development model. The question, how do you begin to define that? So that's a challenge. So we need an articulated strategy as countries, but also an articulated strategy for the continent in order for us to reap these benefits. That's going to be the key challenge moving forward. I think we're beginning through these discussions and African Development Bank, which is beginning to use its muscle in order to mobilize finances which are going to benefit all of us in order to transition effectively into a zero emission by 2050. Thank you.
And that is the package for this focused edition of Energy Frontiers, and we hope you enjoyed it. You can follow the show on Frontier Africa Report's website and across all our social media handles, as shown on the screen. I am Omona Okonkwo, and I will see you next time.